It's very easy to say in a lecture theatre, as we are today, speaking in a crowd like this, that we should wait for the natural progression of history. But I think it's a tough thing to go and tell a veiled woman in Saudi Arabia that 200 years from now, she can have what we do, but she just has to wait. I think this is intolerable. Now, Iraq, obviously referred to earlier, some strange statistics being bandied around. 1 million people in Iraq, and there's a lot of debate as to how many were killed. The West hasn't gone into Iraq and slaughtered 1 million people. Iraq is the way it is because theocratic terrorist groups, Al-Qaeda and their affiliates, and Iranian-funded militants are blowing themselves up in Iraqi marketplaces. The West are not guilty of Al-Qaeda's crimes. I think we should forget that. And also, I must ask Paul, they mentioned that there's no mention of Iraq in the media of these deaths. You must be reading entirely different newspapers for the last 7 years because it's all I've read about. And it's been alluded to tonight, often we hear, who are we to get involved in the affairs of others, say our system is better. We all know these arguments, they're familiar. But let's take this to its natural conclusion. Let's say we don't involve ourselves in looking at the internal nature of regimes. We entirely leave them to themselves. A few examples of where that thinking in recent history has got us. Iraq, after 1991. It meant the killing of the Iraqi resistance that we had encouraged to rise up against Saddam, but then didn't offer them support, allowed the resistance to be crushed, and many killed. Kosovo, Alan's already referred to it. It meant we stood by and allowed the Serbian slaughter of Bosnian Muslims, and still a huge radicalisation point for Al-Qaeda and their affiliates today, what happened in Bosnia in the 90s. Rwanda, where again we stood aside in the 90s, the amount of deaths varies, but 800,000 is the estimate, how many were killed. Darfur, we know about the genocide that's taken place there, and I think it is a genocide by any reasonable understanding of the term. Time and again, non-interventionism has led to more killing. In the likes of North Korea and Iran, can we honestly say that these nations would be in a better state if we involved ourselves in their affairs less? If their governments were less like ours? I don't believe we could. Now, some say foreign policy should only ever be strictly in the national interest, the very Kissingerian, amoral, realpolitik promotion of national interest. Foreign policy as social work, because it was pejoratively dismissed liberal interventionism as being. I think we have a nation at the moment pursuing that path, which is China. Look at the investment in Africa, where the access to natural resources in return for investment and aid packages is extremely common. Now, I can understand the realpolitik, the appeal of it from a foreign policy point of view, but I say that democratic nations are at their best when they're asserting their values. So it's a real shame to me how things are developing in the UK now. The Foreign Commonwealth Office, the FCO, now jokingly being referred to as the Foreign and Commerce Office, because foreign policy in the UK is now far too much being practiced solely in economic interest. Look at Cameron's recent trips to India, where he's gone there on a huge charm offensive in hope of gaining access to that emerging market. Look at his visit to Turkey, where he told lies about our allies, but recognises it's a growing economy, even though they may be going backwards domestically from a human rights point of view. Cameron goes to Turkey and behaves in a pretty undignified manner. Cameron's also largely dismissive of democracy promotion. The phrase imposing democracy from 10,000 feet, which Alan referred to earlier, was said by David Cameron, as if anyone has ever tried such a thing. It's a preposterous thing to suggest. So increasing the UK, ethical foreign policy is out, realpolitik is in. I think this is a backwards step. Ed Miliband, the new leader, God help those who support the Labour Party. Ed Miliband, the new leader, said the Iraq War. Now the Iraq War, I get it. I get why people disagree with it. But Ed Miliband said the Iraq War was wrong because we undermined the United Nations. This is someone in the supposed liberal left saying a war can only have moral legitimacy if Russia, Zimbabwe, China, Iran, all the other dictatorships agree with it. I think this is an intolerable situation we've allowed ourselves to get into.
Only the US and Britain should decide what's justified in terms of war. You're quite right.
Tony Blair. I'm sure some of you would be glad to see the back of him. that his quote in the lead up to Iraq said, and what amazes me is how many people are happy for Saddam to stay. He asked, why don't you get rid of Mugabe? Why not the Burmese lot? Blair's response was, yes, let's get rid of them all. I don't because I can't, but when you can, you should. Now this attitude, despite me leaving 3 years ago, Blair's attitude is not shared in any meaningful way by today's leaders. I think it's a shame that reactionary politics is back in the UK, and I do not think we should applaud it. We should have an ethical dimension in our foreign policy. We should want other nations to share in the benefits that democracy brings, that all of us in the room today have also benefited from. We shouldn't be ashamed of democracy, we shouldn't be ashamed of promoting democracy. And we shouldn't accept there is an equivalence between dictatorships and democracies. Ladies and gentlemen, vote for the motion.